Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of taking a wait and see because they saw this game on the schedule and are really excited to see these two teams match up with one another. We're going to continue to talk Oklahoma, Michigan, get into some trench discussion for all the old school football fans. This is going to be a slobber knocker coming up on a Locked On crossover edition.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Jay Smith, John Williams here of Locked On Sooners, Isaiah Hole of Locked On Wolverines, and we're talking Oklahoma, Michigan ahead of this big-time top 25 blue blood matchup in Norman Saturday night. ESPN College GameDay is going to be there. It's going to be a battle in the trenches. I think nobody is under any false pretense this is going to be a spread them out and sling it kind of a game. Whoever wins up front is going to have the better shot at winning this game. So, Jay, Isaiah kind of touched on Oklahoma not really stopping the run well against Illinois State. They struggled a little bit, gave a few gashes. What's your expectation for Oklahoma this week against Michigan?
I think it's going to be a completely different game plan. It felt like in this game, the goal was to burn as much clock as possible. And so in the beginning, you saw a lot of younger players or newer players playing on the roster and trying to figure out their gaps and filling up those run lanes. And they weren't really as effective as they should have been. But then you saw as the game went on, they started to lock down. I think Oklahoma got gashed for basically 2 or 3 bigger plays like the quarterback scramble or whatnot. And that was 100% placement. That was a new edge that it came in, and you could see that he was chasing the running back instead of going for the quarterback like he probably should have. You know, that read option can get you if you're not prepared for it. But at the same time, that was a veteran player. I'm not going to say the name. You can go back and watch the game if you like, but it's a veteran that just transferred in. And so for them, it's just figuring out, okay, go for the quarterback, let your other linebackers take care of the running back like they always do. And from there, I feel like that's when you're going to see Oklahoma actually shift their game plan. I know the whole purpose and the whole plan that Brent Venables is going to have. He's going to put as much pressure as possible on Bryce Underwood. He's going to make him beat him with his arm. And with the way that Oklahoma's secondary has been revamped, which looks like it's a lot better than we've had over the last couple of years, I expect them to make him throw, just stuff the run as much as possible with those big defensive linemen that we have. And hopefully, see a W from there.
Do you think Michigan, Isaiah, is going to be in a situation where they can stop what a lot of people believe to be one of the best defensive fronts in college football?
That kind of remains to be seen to me, right? Like, I think the good news for Michigan in the front is that even though it wasn't necessarily the most stellar showing, I mean, I don't think it was a bad showing, but it wasn't one of those things where you say like, okay, now you're going to be able to go and handle Oklahoma. Is that these are guys who are a lot more experienced now, and they've spent the entire fall camp going up against a Wink Martindale defense. And I think that will help them because the strength of Michigan's team is that front seven. And you could kind of see it, even if there weren't, like, there was 3 sacks in the game against New Mexico, but that doesn't really tell you the whole story because those 3 sacks did come late. And that would maybe lead you to believe like, okay, well, they weren't able to get pressure. No, Michigan was able to get pressure so much that like New Mexico had to basically do 1-step drops and get rid of the ball or completely roll out the pocket to one side and use a lot of misdirection. And Jack Lane got hit time and time again, regardless. So I think that because that they've had that experience of going up against the Wink Martindale defense and that front and just like the relentless rotation, because they've got 10 guys. I mean, maybe you could even say like 11, 12 guys that ended up being in there because there were a couple that really kind of surprised, like freshman Nate Marshall. I think that gives Michigan at least a little bit of confidence that it can go in and do what it feels like it needs to do. Not to mention, these are the same guys that went up against what last year at least was a good Alabama team last year and Ohio State. And there's a couple guys that aren't there that played against Ohio State, but they did play against, for the most part, these guys played against Alabama and they were able to handle business. So to me, that's like one of those things where Michigan should feel good. even if like this, what we saw in week 1 maybe wasn't quite what you hope to see in just kind of in the aggregate.
Yeah, I think it's hard to make these big sweeping assessments of a team in week 1 against a much inferior competition sometimes, because you don't know the ins and outs of what the coaching staff is trying to get accomplished and what they're wanting to do. You just go get the dub and you leave and start preparing for the blue blood matchup the next week. What can Oklahoma fans expect from a weak Martindale defense, Isaiah?
It's one where you kind of, like, you always hear about like disguises and you're not really sure what you're looking at. That's what is going to be happening a lot is, and I'm sure that's going to be the same on the other end, but it's a lot of, because remember, he's an NFL guy. He was the architect of the defense that Michigan's been running well before he arrived in Ann Arbor. He, ran it with the Baltimore Ravens for quite some time. And for back when Michigan got Mike McDonald in 2021, Wink Martindale was considered to be the top defensive coordinator in all of the NFL. So it's an NFL defense. And last year there were some issues with it because he kind of came in thinking he had NFL personnel, and eventually he kind of realized, no, I've got college guys, and then I can build upon that instead of being like, here's what it is, do it like his predecessors did. We can build on it. And by the end of the year, it was great. And thankfully for him this year, he's working with most of the same cast of characters that he was working with last year. The defensive line in particular, I know everyone looks at Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and says, how can you do it without those guys? Well, Trey Pierce and Rayshon Benny were the 2 starters against Alabama, and they had no problem getting pressure up the middle. So there's going to be a lot of relentlessness up front, a lot of disguises in the back, and you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. You can't sit there and look at it and say, well, it's a 3-4 or if it's a 4-3. There were a lot of times in this game last week where they had 5 down linemen, and I didn't see that at all last year, right? They often play with 2 linebackers. There's times they're going to play with 3. They're going to have a nickel out there quite often. It's just always going to vary, and they're always going to consistently mess with the quarterback's eyes. And I think one of the biggest keys in this game is the fact that John Mateer, in his career to this point, has never seen a defense of this style nor of this caliber. Now, obviously, Michigan has to also execute, which I felt like it didn't do all the time last week. But that's I think a really big thing. I mean, the same thing can be said for Bryce Underwood, but that's going to be really interesting to see how much does he kind of mess with John Mateer's mind the same way that Brent Venables is going to mess with Bryce Underwood's.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's exactly what I was thinking in that one, is that Brent Venables and Wink Martindale are similar in that capacity. They like to bring something up front, roughly around 15 seconds left on the play clock. They change the entire look. So they want the quarterback to have to think about 2 or 3 different things before they can snap the ball. And so, yeah, Brent Venables is going to bring a similar setup, because that's what he did at Clemson. That's how those defenses were so good, and they caused so many problems for Alabama in those national championship games, was they kept switching things up and like I said, messing with the quarterback's eyes. And I know that's what Brent Venables is going to do, especially to a true freshman. He wants him to overthink way more than he wants to. And just like Michigan, that's kind of the one big benefit for Oklahoma and John Mateer is he's going against a coach since the spring that does the exact same type of setup, similar to Wink Martindale is really making your quarterback have to make those adjustments. Same thing with our defensive front. So you're going to see, I think I saw a couple of 4-6s from us that we didn't really do much last year. Those bear fronts, I've even seen them go with, I think it was like 6 DBs, like 3 safeties set up at some point. So I know that similarly for Michigan, for Oklahoma fans, Michigan fans, that's what some of the things you'll see with Oklahoma is a ton of shifting and changing when it comes to how they bring players out. They'll be rotating probably too deep in not only the defensive line, but also in the linebacker room, and letting a lot of the corners and the safeties kind of, stick most of the time out there. But just like Michigan, this is what's going to be the funnest part about this game is I want to see which defense really executes and causes the most havoc for the other team's offense. That's probably the most important thing in this game, regardless, because both teams are really known for them having strong defenses.
We're going to get into some final thoughts for Oklahoma, Michigan coming up next here on a Locked On crossover edition.